Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm here at the Rock Island Auction House today taking a look at some of the guns they're going to be selling in their upcoming December of 2016 premiere auction. We've got a really cool one to look at today. This is a Turner light rifle prototype, second model. Now this is one of the guns that was tested by the US government as part of the program to develop what would eventually be the M1 Carbine. There were a whole bunch of different submissions. There were guns brought in from major companies and major arsenals. John Garand submitted a prototype, Harrington and Richardson had one, Thompson and Auto Ordnance had one, and then you had folks like Russell Turner, who is just a private citizen, inventor, gun designer, lived in Butler, Pennsylvania, and he submitted a rifle because these tests were open to anyone who could submit a gun that met the qualifications. And these qualifications were basically, had to be semi-auto, had to be under 5 pounds, and it had to use this newly developed 30 caliber short rifle cartridge. The cartridge had been developed by Winchester off of the 32 Winchester self-loader. They dropped it down to 30 caliber. And we'll get to that in a minute because it was that ammunition that caused an issue for Turner. Now there were two sets of main trials for the M1 Carbine. And the first one was in August of 1941, and those initial guns were actually had to be select fire. And none of the guns that were submitted to that first trial were satisfactory, and so the government decided to come back a couple months later with a second trial. As part of that second trial, they got rid of the full auto requirement that just was deemed unnecessary. These guns were supposed to be basically personal defense carbines, replacements for pistols. They weren't intended to really be frontline guns at all, and the select fire thing, it was overly complex, put a lot more wear on the guns, and just wasn't deemed necessary. So they got rid of it. Turner's first version, the first gun he submitted, had this kind of skeletal looking stock, really. A lot of perforated metal, tube steel, and I'm sure he did it to reduce weight. It actually had no wooden components on it, which in some ways would have been a benefit, but the government testing looked at this and went, no, that's not acceptable. Try again and give it some wood furniture. And it had some other faults with it that he attempted to correct, and of course the first version was select fire. What we have here is the second version, which he actually submitted in September of 1941, so just a month after the testing of his first gun. And this one obviously has wood furniture. He made a couple of other tweaks to it. It is now semi-auto only, which kind of simplifies the fire control system. Unfortunately, when this one was tested, it didn't perform well. So Turner blamed a lot of these problems on his ammunition, and he wasn't actually wrong. So the first batch of ammunition that the US government bought for these rifles from Winchester was loaded with IMR 4227 powder. Worked fine, worked great. It was like a 108 grain bullet at that point. And they distributed some of this ammunition to the various designers and companies that were producing guns. So the guys would have some ammunition to test. Of course, this was a brand new cartridge, so it wasn't like they could go just buy it elsewhere. And Turner says he got his gun running just great with that ammo, no problems at all. And when he got to the testing, it didn't run right. Well, it turns out the second batch of 50,000 rounds that the government bought, they had actually changed the powder. Instead of IMR, they were now running it on Hercules 2400. Basically, same strict chamber pressure, but because the powder burned at a different rate, the pressure curve was different. This is not important at all for, say, bolt-action rifles, but it's quite important for semi-automatic rifles because the location of the gas port in the gun is specifically cited based on the pressure that will exist when the bullet gets to that point, which dictates how much force is exerted on the gas piston, and that's critical to how the gun runs. It's a problem very much like this that was responsible for a lot of the early problems with the M16 in Vietnam. The powder formulation was changed, which changed the pressure curve, which changed the pressure at the gas port, which had a substantial effect on how the guns operated. Well, the same thing happened to Turner. According to Turner, he was so disgusted by this when he figured out what was going on that he didn't even bother to change the port position on his rifle. According to some of his correspondence, he said, yeah, he could have made the gun run fine based on Hercules 2400 ammunition, but didn't. So maybe he should have, maybe not. You can certainly understand his frustration at being given one cartridge to design the gun with and then having that just changed on him at the testing. It's kind of unfortunate. This is actually a really handy little rifle. Would it have been better than what was ultimately adopted, the Winchester M1 Carbine? I don't know. I don't know that there's any real way to tell that today. But this is a slick little gun. It's obviously, as I've alluded to, it's gas piston operated, and it actually uses a side locking bolt, which is pretty cool. That's not something that we see very much of. And it's a slick, simple little mechanism. It's a very light, handy carbine. And I think we ought to pull it all apart and take a look at the insides. So as a prototype, we know there's not going to be much in the way of markings, but Mr. Turner did helpfully put these on the wrist of the rifle. Turner, Butler, PA, Pennsylvania, 1941. So here's the side of the rifle, and we can see pretty much all the important stuff here. Trigger, obviously. The safety on this is borrowed from the M1. Not a bad plan if you're making a gun that you know is going to be adopted alongside the M1. Obviously, they'd be happy with that style of safety. So it doesn't travel nearly as far. We'll see when we take this apart exactly how it works. This lever is the magazine release. So you can see the magazine catch right there. Pulling this lever down releases that. So simple, effective, seems like a pretty decent idea. This button is actually the disassembly catch, so we'll get to that in a moment. Our bolt handle is here. In the version that was actually tested by Aberdeen, this is a hook instead of this round plug. The hole here is actually your ejection port. So this has a nice solid cover that covers the action while the gun is in battery. When it opens, this port appears in place to allow the empty case through when it needs to. Not really anything going on the left side. We do have this fixed rear sight. Nothing fancy here, nothing even adjustable. Remember, this was supposed to be a close-range personal defense carbine. The original, even the final adopted version of the M1 Carbine at first only had a 2-position rear sight. And of course, that could have easily been retrofitted onto this gun had they decided to adopt it. Front sight is just a real basic fixed post there, or fixed blade. When we cycle the action, there you can see this cutout serves as the ejection port when the thing's open. That rectangular block right there is the ejector. And if we look at this from the underside, you can clearly see the bolt locking into the side of the receiver there. Very much like a ZH-29, really the only substantial production side locking bolt out there. All right, now to take this apart, we're going to start by removing this screw, which allows us to take off the lower handguard. Unlike some prototypes, this thing is actually pretty well designed for disassembly. This screw is captive, so it can't come out. You won't lose it. Pull the handguard down. It does have this button at the front, which fits into this hole in the sling swivel block. So that locks the handguard in place. And then we can very clearly see the barrel, the gas port right here, and the gas piston connecting to the bolt handle. The upper handguard is just held on by a little spring latch. So we will carefully remove that. There we go. So there's our upper handguard. Got a wooden lip back here, and that spring catch to hold it in place. Here's our gas block. There's going to be a gas port inside right about here. Gas will come up into this cylinder where the gas piston head is located. When gas pushes this backwards, you can see here is the actual rod. This is a keeper, which holds the spring in place, and that spring simply acts to pull, or pull I suppose, the bolt handle back into place after each shot. This is the screw lug that holds the lower handguard in place. You can see from these two ribs, this is not an M1 Carbine magazine. The magazines for these guns were all proprietary to the individual specific guns at this point. It wasn't until the gun was formally adopted that the magazine was standardized. So you could probably use an M1 Carbine as a decent starting point for making a magazine to replace the missing one on this. All right, now, to see the firing mechanism, we have to pull this side plate off. If you look closely here, you can see the cutout there. What we're going to do is pull this latch back, course, we'll use our disassembly tool to do that. It's just a little spring-loaded catch. And I do also have to pull the magazine release down. That holds it in as well. So here's our side plate. This is the magazine catch, which is built onto the side plate. And then this spring-loaded catch right here is what locks it in place. All right, with that out of the way, we can see a very simple fire control mechanism in here, obviously taken from the M1 Garand. We have our hammer right here, and then 2 hooks to catch it. So when you fire, if you hold the trigger back, the rear hook will catch the hammer. If you then release the trigger, it'll snap forward. The front hook will catch it, won't fire full auto. The safety simply moves this little block underneath the trigger so that you can't pull it far enough to release the hammer. Push the safety forward, now pull that forward, allow the hammer to drop. The hammer spring is captive in this tube which goes into the wrist of the stock. Hammer is just sitting on a pin there. That'll come out easily enough, although because it's under spring tension, I'm going to leave it in. So in order to get the bolt out, I have to disconnect the bolt carrier, bolt handle assembly here from the gas piston and recoil spring. I'm going to do that by opening it all the way and then pivoting this guy off the gas piston. It's a little hard to see here, but that's actually how that works. Got that. Pull that back. I'm going to hold on to this so it doesn't snap forward. And that comes up like that. And now our bolt is separated. So now I just have a little bit of residual pressure from the hammer holding the bolt in place, so I can lift it out. And now we have our bolt assembly. If we look here in the receiver, you can see the cutout right there. That's the locking shoulder that the bolt is going to lock against. This angled surface right here in the bolt is what locks into that shoulder. So when this is in battery, it's positioned like this. The bolt's pushed up to the side, up to the left. So this surface is locked in place. Firing pin can go forward. When the bolt handle is pushed backwards, which is done by the gas piston, it is tied to the bolt itself by this pivoting link. So as this goes backwards, it pulls the bolt in up against the bolt handle assembly. Just like that. That is what forces the gun to come out of battery. It'll then cycle backwards. The recoil spring will then pull it forwards, and as it goes forwards, you can see this sloped piece is going to act on the bolt. That pushes the bolt into battery. Again, because of this pivot, locking the two together. Now I mentioned the semicircular nature of this pin. What that does is act as an out-of-battery firing pin safety. So you'll see, actually I can pull the firing pin out here. There's the firing pin. This cutout matches up to that flat surface. Now when this is all assembled, if this link is fully forward, that flat surface allows the firing pin to extend out the front of the bolt and fire. However, if this pin is not all the way forward, that flat surface is running this direction, and that piece is now blocking the firing pin and preventing it from coming forward. If it's halfway, can't really get the firing pin out enough. What this does is prevent the firing pin from moving forward under any circumstances until the bolt has actually been pushed into battery and is locked. So a clever safety feature built in a really slick little way. You can see there how the firing pin has to go that far forward, and it can only do so if that flat is in the correct orientation. So here is our connection between the gas piston here and the bolt handle assembly or bolt carrier. This just fits over and locks in place, and you can only remove it when the bolt's fully rearward and you pull it out away from the side plate, which locks it in place. So disassembly and construction on this thing is actually really pretty clever, especially for an early prototype. You'll see a lot of prototypes that just don't have this much thought that goes into not just making them function, but also making them easy to disassemble and easy to work on in the field. So the fire control mechanism in particular, with all of 2 parts really, plus some springs, is really nicely done. Everything about this actually I think is really pretty slick. It's really too bad that Turner had ammunition problems that caused grief with this rifle. Whether it could have beaten out Winchester in a totally fair competition, I don't know, but it kind of would have been interesting to see. Thank you for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'm always excited to see prototype rifles from this program. There's some photographic evidence out there of them. In fact, what's interesting is Turner clearly built more than one of these second model guns, because the one that went to Aberdeen for the second run of trials looks rather different from this. The stock or the handguard configuration is different. The bolt handle configuration is a bit different. And so he obviously had one he sent there and had at least one other that he kept for himself as a developmental gun, or maybe just because he liked the gun himself. So that's what we have here, one that remained in his possession, and could remain in your possession too, for that matter. If you'd like to own this one yourself, it is of course coming up for sale. Doesn't have the magazine, unfortunately, but I'm sure that can be fabricated up by someone who's interested. If you take a look at the description text below the video, you'll find a link to Rock Island's catalog page on this piece. You can take a look at their pictures and description and place a bid over the phone or online or here at the auction in person. Thanks for watching.